All right. Welcome to our fifth Wednesday webinar. What we try to do here is whenever there's a fifth Wednesday of the month, we try to bring in an expert that's adjacent to SEO. Um, you know, how much I love doing SEO but there's a lot involved with SEO. So today we're going to talk about content. We're not necessarily going to talk about optimizing content because honestly, that's not typically the problem when we write content for our clients. Typically, the problem is, well, let's be honest, it's the client, or it's us understanding the client, or us, getting the client's buy-in, or things like that. So, I would like to introduce you to John Clements. John is the owner of Cedar Press Proofreading, and he writes for a lot of clients. John, welcome.
Hey, thanks, David. And just I think if I remember right, we both grew up in the Wichita, Kansas area,
That's right.
and we both have a link to the serial killer BTK.
Oh,
So
that's right.
that's
So
our
let's
claim to
talk
fame.
about, yeah, but we're both feeling much better now.
Yes. So yeah, thanks for having me on. So I got to know David because he was actually on my podcast, which is called Content Creators Unite. You can find it on YouTube or any podcast play anywhere they sell podcasts, you can find it. But as you mentioned, I'm a content editor. I'm a writer in the B2B space. So I do a bunch of work for businesses. I'm gonna actually, before I forget, I'm gonna put my LinkedIn link and my website in the chat, so you can feel free to connect with me that way while I'm talking. Even it won't bother me. Um, so yeah, it basically, if you need help either writing content from whole cloth, or if you have content that you've written, but you need that second set of eyes to make sure that it's dialed in, I can help you with that. That's what I do. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about content today.
Yeah, great. I mean, this is going to be a great conversation because when John and I spoke last time, we were talking about how sometimes it's just hard to write for clients. John does a lot of work in the B2B space, and I do as well with SEO. And when it comes to writing for businesses try to reach other businesses, I think it adds a level of complexity to it. And, you know, what are some of the struggles you've encountered, John, when writing for different B2B companies?
Boy, there's a couple. One of them is, so for example, I do a lot of work in the functional medicine space.
Mm.
So if you don't know what that is, a functional medicine is about how do we be healthy people without just automatically defaulting to taking drugs and getting that kind of medical care. And so my joke about this is, how many ways can you tell people to eat healthy and exercise? Because that's really what it comes down to. And so that's been my challenge over the past really 4 years of doing writing in that space, is how do you do that? And well, the truth is you can do that in a ton of different ways. I was thinking about this beforehand because I did get a little bit of advance notice. And I was thinking, in the book of Ecclesiastes, it says there is nothing new under the sun. And okay, so he wasn't talking about content, but it fits because it's just really hard to come up with original new ideas. But what you can do, or what I found, is like there's always another angle to explore. There's always another nuance to tease out. Um, so with functional medicine, for example, okay, how do you break that down into topics? Well, I can write about all kinds of things. I can write about food. I can write about nutrition, and those are different topics. They're not the same topic. I can write about exercise, sleep habits, environmental toxins, supplements, mental health. I've even written articles about how to breathe. Like that's because that's a part of functional medicine, believe it or not. Breath work. I've written more than one article on that. So uh, that's kind of one of the struggles of just finding new things to write about and new ways to write about the same things over and over again. Now we can kind of go into detail about how I do that if you want, but that's like a big that that's probably the biggest content issue, right? Is just finding new subjects to talk about over time.
Tell us a little about your thought process on coming up with the adjacent ideas like breathing or food toxins or whatever
Yeah.
in a particular space.
So I think I have I have three or four main ways that I do it. Number one, my clients often will help me brainstorm a list. So they'll have ideas that they put forward. So a lot of times it's just they give me a spreadsheet with like 10 ideas, and that's my schedule for the next, 10 articles. So that makes it real easy. Um, because I've been doing this a long time, I will suggest to them articles or ideas. So I actually read a book about Alzheimer's that I thought would make a great article. And so I suggested it, I pitched it, and they said yes. And so I wrote that article. I also one time found this is a couple years ago, I think right at the end of COVID, the Surgeon General of the United States declared a loneliness epidemic. And it was fascinating to read his report on it. And so I went to my clients and I said, hey, this would make like we have to do this because this is so important and it fits right in with what we're trying to tell people to do. So just being observant is where I get ideas as well. And then this is one case. So I think we're all learning how to use AI, but AI actually is very good at brainstorming. So if I'm out of ideas, I'll go to an AI tool and just say, okay, I write in this space. I want to write some blog posts. Give me like 50 ideas. Because what happens is if you ask it for 50 ideas, number one, it may give you 50, it may not. Sometimes it doesn't, but it'll give you a bunch. And then there's probably five great ideas in there, and there's probably 10 pretty good ideas, and then the rest are crap, and you just throw those away. But it at least gets you from the blank page to something, and that's often the hardest hurdle to jump. So really, it's just, communication with the clients, coming up with my own ideas over time, and then relying on like an AI brainstorming when I just am at, I'm at a loss. So that's how I do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think sometimes we are hired as the experts and we're almost afraid to ask the client to help us. But we're not really like asking the client to help us when we say, "Hey, client, give us some ideas." Sometimes they don't know that's helpful. And just by asking, oh, well, yeah. I've even like met the sales team and said, "Hey, sales team, what are common questions that people are asking you? And maybe we could work together to write that content. So number one, it's easier for you. You forward the article on to someone because you're tired of answering that question. Or maybe it becomes something more. Maybe it becomes a lead magnet, or maybe it becomes a brochure or something. But like talking to other adjacent departments, sales departments, and stuff like that can be really great treasure troves to find stuff. But
Yeah.
because we're
Actually,
kind of
if
the
I could,
experts, we're
yeah.
almost afraid to ask.
That actually reminds me, one of my other podcast guests actually brought this up. So when you're talking with the sales department, let's say, and they're probably going to know what the most common questions are. They maybe even have like a cheat sheet on them. But tell them to go look through their old emails. What
Mm,
questions are they answering in emails all the time? That's another place to go find information.
yeah. I One of the questions I ask almost every client is, do you have anything sitting around that's an internal resource that you refer to a lot? And sometimes it'll be like, yeah, we have this old checklist on how to like do an inspection on a factory. I'm like, wow, can you share it with me? Right? Because they have this thing sitting around and they haven't looked at it for years. Maybe it's just so much a part of the process to even think about it. But like clients sometimes they already have things ready that they don't know is valuable. And having that interaction relationship with the client can really help you help them, I think, a lot. Um, Something we had talked about offline is that and you kind of hit on this idea of the relationship between curiosity and writing. It's, you sounds like you're a reader too, and you're reading books and you're looking at stuff, but to me that's like that extra step. How does that help you?
Yeah, yeah, we had talked beforehand, like what do you do if you've got a subject and it's just boring? And I was like, okay, well, what's the most boring thing I can think about? And then I thought of something. So I've got a little object here. So I'm gonna try to get in the frame. So this is one of my favorite books right here. Whoops, as I hit my microphone. This book is called The Book. It's by Keith Houston. Um, it's about books, not like the writing in them, but the physical pages and the cover. And I thought it would be really easy. It would have been really easy for this author, Keith Houston, to go, books, God, that's old technology. They're ubiquitous. Like, who cares? I don't know. It's a bunch of pages and you like staple them together. It's a book. Like, what? How is that interesting? But he didn't do that. He was curious. He said, no, like, how did this actually happen? How did this actually get created? How did we go from, writing on clay tablets using cuneiform script 5,000 years ago to to this? Like, how did that happen? So he actually chronicles it out in this book and it's absolutely fascinating. So to me, I think if you have a mindset of curiosity, I don't think there is a boring subject on the planet. I don't think there's a boring person on the planet. Because if you ask genuinely curious questions and are actually interested in the answers, I think there's all kinds of interesting tidbits that are going to float to the surface.
Yeah, that's really important, I think. Uh, Anybody can write something and it not really be helpful, right? And we talk about Google, for instance, like about a year ago, no, a little over a year ago, Google released what's called the helpful content update. And gosh, like it hit websites hard because some websites, their entire content strategy was say what everybody else is saying. They would look at each other's websites and say, I want to say the same thing on my website. They might say it's slightly different. They might use different examples, but they weren't really functionally any different. And Google basically slapped them all hard. But the sites that did well were the ones who kind of took the extra effort to be a little bit more curious and not just answer the same questions everybody else is answering, but take that step further and go a little deeper. Um, I have clients will sometimes hire me for a search and they'll say, how many blog posts do I get a month? Well, let's not think of your articles as a commodity. Sometimes you're going to get three, sometimes you're going to get five, sometimes you might get 10, and other times you might get one based on what we need. And if you give us the flexibility to produce what you need rather than a set commodity of pieces, that allows us to be more creative with them. That allows us to have more insight and be unique. But if you just are paying for 4 blog posts a month, well, you can always find someone who can write 4 blog posts a month cheaper, and they're not going to be remotely interesting or helpful, right? Because good night. Like talking about AI, AI content. I think so many of you have heard me wax eloquent about AI generated content and how useless it is for a Google search. But John, I like what you said about using it as a brainstorming process. I mean, that is a really helpful tool.
Yeah, as long as you verify everything, even in the brainstorming session, don't
Hmm.
just believe it. And if I could jump in about I think we should go deeper about the content piece about like being helpful
Yeah.
because yeah, anybody can write you a blog post, AI can write you a blog post, but to me, it's really it comes down to like a couple things. Number one is solving pain points. So like with my content, if you look at my content on just on LinkedIn, for example, I'm not yeah, I've learned over time, and I'm trying to like pivot a little bit that I'm an editor and a writer. And so if you look at all the editors and writers on LinkedIn, they all talk about grammar and what the Chicago Manual style says. And that's great. I mean, those are cool things, but like let's be honest, if you're not a writer, nobody cares. They don't care. So I think the problem that I solve is I help you worry less and I take stress off your plate. I think that's a problem I solve. And it's I just happen to do it by writing well. So I think like that's where I'm trying to pivot because I think that's going to be more effective long term. So like really getting down to the why of like, let's say you're writing for an industry and you're like, I was like, I don't know what like I don't know, maybe you write for a factory that makes toothpicks. Like how boring is that? It's the most boring thing I think I could think of. But someone's buying those toothpicks. Why are they buying those toothpicks? Like find that out, and now you've got a pain point to write about. Are you tired of whittling your own toothpicks for your restaurant? I don't know. I don't know what to, but don't just stop at information. Get to that why, and then the other piece of it is anytime you can relate a story, you're going to get people's attention because we are built to tell and listen to stories. So even in the most, you know, technical, hard to write for industry, if there's a way to put a story in there, boy, you're going to see some returns on that.
Yeah, the story concept, I'm a big fan of the story brand framework. And I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but the short version of the story brand framework is that we are not the hero of our client's story or our customer's story. Our clients become the hero, and we're the guide to make them the hero. And changing that pivot on how we write content instantly makes it more powerful because it can transform something from you should buy our widget or our widget polishing service is the best service to listen. I know you have a problem with widgets that gum up your system, but if you use our product, you can become the engineer who saves your company millions of dollars a year simply because you introduced us to, what, yeah, what a terrible example.
Mhm.
But that pivot of, hey, we're telling a story about widgets. We're just not just another provider of widgets. That makes it much more compelling and much more like you got to buy from this person, which from a widget producer perspective is like, wow, we can actually sell our widgets a little bit more because we're kind of selling the story with it. We don't have to just compete to the bottom of all the other people who can provide a similar widget. Um, it sounds like you do some work in the medical space, John. How do you work with in industries with severe regulations and limitations like that? Medical can be tough to write for because you got to be careful about claims you make
Yes.
or
Yeah.
expertise and who the heck is saying this thing about that. How do you
Yeah.
tend to work with
So the functional medicine space, I wouldn't say it's as highly regulated as maybe certain other spaces. Like I used to work at Boeing, and so that's a regulated area. Um, but it's important for my functional medicine clients to have credibility because what I learned, because when I first got into that field, I thought they were a bunch of kooks. I'll just be honest. And it turns out there are kooks, and then there are serious, legitimate doctors. And so, right, that's the trick is like, I need to make sure that everything I write is from a serious, legitimate doctor point of view. So, my clients and I are very big about everything, or at least I was, everything that I wrote is backed by some kind of report or research or finding, period. That's just what it is. Even to the point of like, I'll write advertisements for them, and I don't feel comfortable writing in an advertisement using another person's voice that I do such and such with these products if I don't know that for sure. I will find some other way to say that because I don't feel comfortable making up something or lying, about what this person, I don't know what they do. They need to tell me what they do with the product and how it helps them. I'm not going to make that up. Um, I love my woo-woo doctors, acupuncture. Yeah, I love my chiropractor. He's great. Um, like I said, to me, it's relying on established medicine to make claims so that if anyone questions it, you can always go back and say, well, actually, this is the study that we referenced that shows this is true. Um, and I know it even may go against like, conventional medicine, but this is what the research tells us. So to me, basing everything I can on fact is like the number one thing.
Yeah, I mean, Google will put medical content under extra scrutiny. They put it in the your money or your life category, which is anything that affects bodily harm, finances. If the content is could really cause harm by being incorrect, Google puts it under a much higher standard to even show it in the search results. This is where things like CBD and stuff like that can really have problems in Google. Um, I have a client that does medical malpractice, and because they talk about medical things, even though they're not doctors, actually they have Harvard doctors on staff, but still, like it the standard of credibility by Google is incredibly high that you really have to be careful about what you say and also be careful about the claims because Google is past the keyword phase, right? They're not just saying, oh, you have the right keyword on the page, therefore you must be the right word about breathing or,
Yeah.
best article about whatever. It's actually evaluating it using machine learning at this point. And so you really have to be very careful about what you say.
Yeah. And really just like a quick tip on that that just reminded me of is that could be as simple as changing the word from this product or service will do something to this product or service can do something,
Right.
because then you're taking the claim out of it.
Right.
So it can be very minor, little word changes that actually impact it quite a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you worked with any other, you said aerospace, but any other industries that tend to be highly regulated where clients are more likely to say no than yes to approve your content?
I'm trying to think back. I've worked with probably close to 30 companies at this point, and I honestly don't think so. I think that's the main element. Is my about half a dozen functional medicine clients. That's the main time we get into that.
Yeah, yeah. I, to me, it's so much of client approval, especially in the initial parts, is a psychology problem of I'm paying someone to write for me because I don't have the time to do it. But they still feel like they could do it. And so they look over the content and they red line things that are not necessarily wrong, but just they would say it different. And just to me, it feels like the first 3 months of an SEO engagement is convincing the client that it's different, but it's not wrong. You're rejecting content not because it's incorrect, but because it is a little bit different than the way you would have said it. Have you ever encountered those kinds of problems?
I have, yeah. So actually, so I have a long-term client who I do a lot of editing for and a little bit of writing, and this client is very specific about his voice, and so the first thing I do if I'm going to do a writing job is I make sure that I learn about the client's existing voice because I want to match it as best I can. So um, this particular client wants to be an authority, but he also wants to be relatable. So there's a balance of formality and informality. And they asked me to write a blog post for them, or no, a newsletter article for them. And I did. And I wrote it according to the style guide, which tells about the voice. And I've read so much of his stuff. I thought I had it dialed in. Um, and then came back and said, well, we'd rather have it changed in these areas. Okay, well, that's fine. So I, went back and forth, and eventually they just decided they were going to do something else. And it's like, okay, so, but because they're really good clients, they still paid me for my work because they asked me to do it. And, otherwise they wouldn't be my long-term clients. So I was deeply appreciative. I'm not complaining at all. It's just in this case, it just didn't work. But that kind of ties into my policy, which is I will do the absolute best job that I can possibly do to write something in the way that you want it to be written. And I will accommodate you with, a round or two of feedback. That's totally fine. But I'm not necessarily willing to revise it 10 times. That might cost you money if you want to do that. So my wife is a graphic designer. She gives two revisions in her contracts. After that, it's going to cost you. Um, but hopefully my relationships are developed to the point where that doesn't happen. Um, but at the end of the day, I have to step back and say, okay, even if the client wants to do something that I think is stupid or wrong, at the end of the day, it's their baby, and I need not to have ownership of that. I need to do the absolute best job I can do, and let go, right? They, I had to actually, so I own an agency, uh, and so I had one of my own editors editing a book, I don't know, about a year ago. And she edited the book for me for this client, did a great job. And then she messaged me privately and said, like, this book is terrible, like it needs developmental editing. It's not ready to be published. I can't believe you. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Look, this guy came to me and told me his book was ready for editing. Okay. He's an adult man. If he can't figure out how to run his business, that is not my problem. And I'm not trying to be mean, right? I'm not trying to be hard to get along with. But if he comes to me telling me that he's had multiple people review it and it's ready for editing, then I'm going to edit it. And if someone hands me a terrible book, I'm going to hand them back a polished terrible book. So I think there's that element of having boundaries that can be a piece of it. And then really, like, ultimately though, my advice for this kind of situation is I always when I start working with anyone, I always say, let's do a test piece. Because and as much as they're testing me out to see if I can do the job, I'm testing them out to see if I want to work with them. Those red flags will probably appear in that test piece. In which case I can make a decision if I want to continue working with them or not, and they can make the same decision. So, right, I'm not their employee, I'm a business partner, and I'm under no obligation to continue with them. So really, like, having that test piece is a great way to kind of forestall some of this. Knowing how many revisions you're willing to do. Um, yeah, editing a first chapter of a book, seeing how it goes from there. I've done that. Like, that's a thing I've done. And then I don't know if any of you are writers or not, but if you are, this is a tip I've learned that I found to be true, is the more you can raise your rates, the fewer bad clients you're going to find. My worst client I ever had, it was one of my first. He paid me $10 to edit um, I think it was like a seminary paper. I think I went to seminary, so I was like a natural, like, oh, let's start with this. I spent more work on that stupid paper for $10 than I did, for hundreds of dollars worth of ads that I wrote last week. So it's really this weird thing. If you can raise your rates over time, you can weed out a lot of those bad actors and you can just work with really awesome people. So those are some tips that I've just collected over the years.
No, I think I've learned the hard way. Those are the great ways to do it. Like I will, and from a coming from a different perspective, as the SEO professional hired by the client to manage the content, I'm always looking for new writers, and I'm always happy to pay the writer for the work. They get paid whether the work is accepted by the client or not, because they have done the work, right? I, as the business owner, sometimes have to eat the content cost, right? Because I paid them, the client hated it. Here's your check that I promised you. We will not be working together. It might be because they're a bad writer. It might be because the client is not ready for them yet. But it's important to me to pay my writers for the work done. But I always make all my clients very clear, you get one revision. So use it wisely. And um, I say that boldly to y'all, but when the rubber hits the road, it doesn't really work out that way. Sometimes, okay, there's a second revision in there, but I try to set the expectation that we have to keep moving here. And so one revision, don't give it to you and then the next person. And then once we approve it, then the next person reviews it. And then, no, like we get one revision. So I try to work with them to internally figure out, often in the first pieces, who is going to get the final approval. And if it's you, great. But what happens when your boss reads it online? Will they then want to review it? Or the legal team need to review it, right? So I work with them to build their internal processes. So maybe they do the first run, the internal contact with my client, and then they pass it after the first run to the legal team. The legal team has to approve it, and then I pass it back, and then we get it fully approved. But I work with them in their processes to make sure the number of revisions are minimal. And I pay the writers saying, whatever price you give me, please price in one revision, right? Because that to me, that's fair. Because I like you, like cheap clients are never worth it.
They're the worst.
They really are. And and I think so much of that is they are instantly devaluing what I do for them. And we all, okay, maybe I won't project on y'all. I suffer from imposter syndrome terribly. So sometimes it's really hard to say, I can't believe they're paying me this much for that. But, you know, so that's where I cave and that's where oh, for them, and that's where I always get into troubles.
Yeah. I mean, but for a long-term client, I'm willing to help. You
Yeah.
know, like you said, it's not a hard and fast thing. It's an expectations thing. If I've got a good client, I'll bend over backwards for them,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and maybe I shouldn't, but I do anyway.
Yeah. 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 Um, you were talking about, client voice and client perspective. Do you help clients who don't have that developed yet develop it? And if so, how do you do it? Or do your clients typically have that when they come to you?
Um, they all typically are going to have a voice, whether they know it or not, because they're not coming to me with zero LinkedIn presence, zero blog presence, zero They have something.
Hmm.
So one of the things that I'll do if my clients don't have it is I will create for them an internal style guide, which is literally as easy as opening a new browser window and typing doc.new. And that brings up a new Google Doc and you just start typing. It's that easy. But so like I just ghost wrote a book in the functional medicine space. And so I took all of the information that um they gave me about here's like basically they gave me all this doctor, all of his Instagram posts and a bunch more information. And then here's another AI use that I found that actually is really helpful for this. I went to Google's Notebook LM and I took all the notes they gave me and I dumped it in there and basically that allowed me to search things extremely efficiently. Um, and again, I'm not like, going out and finding information. I'm just searching that database. And I use Google LLM to say, okay, analyze all of these posts and give me a style guide. And it did it. And I could read through and go, yep, that sounds right. That sounds right. We're going to tweak this, or I'm going to change that. So now I have a style guide. Now I know the voice. Now I know how to write. And in this case, a lot of them were Instagram quotes, which were a little bit too informal for a book. So I had to tweak them a little bit along the way. Um, but really, that's how I solve that problem is if they don't have a style guide, I create one and we just kind of document how it is. And then someone says, what if they have their voice and they like it, but it's not the best voice for their client? No, that's a good question. I think that ties into what I just did, right? Like it
Would you like an example, John? By the way,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking just off the top of my head, somebody who is a personal trainer, and their voice is comfort, um, being like so really, really nice, that kind of a thing, right? It's like whatever you want to do, client, it's okay. You'll eventually get into the best shape of your life. That's what I thought of.
Hmm. Yeah, that's probably a discussion, right? That's probably where you would want to really sit
Yeah,
down
at
with them and
what
say, who
point are
is
you
your,
polishing
yeah,
the turd so much that
yeah,
it's not useful anymore? Because
yeah,
that's one you just challenged me because I'm a jerk when it comes to sometimes my clients. And if they give me something that is subpar, I will entrench. But you had I think a much healthier perspective is like, this is what they wanted. I have edited the book, even though the book was terrible. And I empathize with your employee and I have a hard time doing that. So this is kind of a similar kind of question. Like, here's my brand voice. Oh, that's a really terrible choice. How, at what point are you going to say,
yeah.
okay,
It depends. I mean, it's relationship based, right? All of it. I think for Dave's question, like example, by the way, were you the one who your mom grew up in Wichita on a farm and you're a Shocker fan? Good for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Didn't wear my KU hat today, but I got one. Um, I would want to know about that. I would want to know more about the client's ideal client. Who are you trying to reach? Because maybe there's a segment of the population that would respond well to that messaging, and maybe that's who he's trying to reach. So I'd have to have more information about that. And maybe that's the way the conversation would go is who are you trying to reach? What are their pain points? What's their personality like? And okay, well, if you're trying to reach them, have you thought about maybe let's alter the your voice in this way or that way? What is that? How does that feel to you? Because we do want to be authentic. But that doesn't, but at the same time, I talk differently to my kids than I do to my wife than I do to you, right? So there's there's multiple little rivers, right, in the valley of authenticity. So I would have to have a discussion and just find out more information in that case.
I, I, I've really struggled, and probably it's because I'm not a writer, that when clients will give me input about an article one of my writing team has provided, they might say, this is not in the right voice, and they will reject an article. But I don't know enough about voice to ask them what about the voice or what makes the voice incorrect. So it feels to me that sometimes they'll use the concept of voice or tone as a way to reject things, but it's not clear to me how to make it better to conform with that.
Yeah, that's where when I write these style guides, that's where I try to get adjectives from them. What are we trying to do? So, um, two example, I get, let's again, functional medicine, because that's where a lot of my currently a lot of my writing is. So I have one client who he wants to come across like a bedside manner of a doctor. Like you're in the clinic and he's right there with you next to you and he's explaining things. He's still being respectful and honest, but he's also speaking, at a bit of a higher level because he's educated. And then I have this other client I just ghostwrote wrote this book for, and he wants to be much more informal. He wants to be a little more fun loving, a little more like he's just your next door neighbor who happens to be a doctor and you're drinking a beer together and he's telling you about all this stuff. So if I can paint those pictures in my mind with those really descriptive adjectives, that's going to help me a lot because then it's not like you said, voice. What does voice mean? I don't know. Active voice, passive voice. What are you talking about? But is it, is it supposed to be informational? Is it supposed to be entertaining? Is it supposed to be written like someone who has gone and gotten a doctorate? Is it supposed to be written as more of someone who's your neighbor? Like I can write to those. And so that's what I'm trying to get to.
So it sounds to me like if next time a client rejects a piece of content because it doesn't hit their voice, I should delve more deeply into what to tell me about, describe the voice to me a little bit more clearly. What adjectives would you use to describe that voice? What are the circumstances under which, if this were a conversation, this would be happening? It's a doctor having a beer, or I'm giving a dissertation at Harvard.
Yeah.
What's
And
the
yeah.
picture?
And to Dave's point in the comments, yeah, if they don't know their ideal client, it's all, then you're just guessing. And then,
Yeah.
sometimes you have to guess. Sometimes you just have to like try something and that's fine. But you really, it all has to come back to who's reading this, what are they trying to get out of it, who are we trying to reach? And then that should dictate your voice to a certain degree.
Yeah. How do you go about a process of understanding your clients' industries?
Um, there's a couple of things that I do. Obviously just writing a ton over time, I've learned so much about, these industries. So one thing I do is I keep all my notes, all of my notes, all of my writing, everything. I use Scrivener because it's amazing. And so that's my repository. I can always go back and look and see what I looked up. Um, Wikipedia is a great place to kind of give you the basics and then to point you to primary and secondary sources. Um, you can use AI to explain things to you, but again, I would verify everything if you do that. One of the best tips I ever heard about how to understand something that you're not familiar with, it actually came from one of my favorite podcasts, which is Stuff You Should Know. If you don't listen to that podcast, you should because it's amazing. But they've said multiple times over their 15 plus year run that if they can find a website about whatever subject they're talking about that's aimed at children, that is the best resource because it breaks it down simply using small words, and then they don't assume you know anything. So like for real, if you can find a kid's website on that subject, that's gold. And then also that's oh yeah. So this kind of goes back to my auditing days. So I used to work in quality, and if you like, you have to go dig into stuff all the time. So like just asking questions. If you can find an old timer in your industry, man, get buy that person a beer because they're gonna know all the stories, they're gonna know all the facts, they're gonna know why things happen the way they do. That's a gold mine. And then if you really need help, ask the client to record like a 5 minute loom on the subject. That can help too. Oh yeah, also children's books, sure. Yeah, that'll work too.
Well, I want to make sure we have time to answer like a couple of questions. If you all have questions about content, even if it's like a very specific, like struggling through one of your clients or content. Well, man, I'm so glad you've all
I'll ask
figured it
something.
out. No, go, please do.
What if, John, what if you have a client who really has like who has a product, a main product, but they've really got a couple of different use cases for that product?
Oh, like
How
which
would
one would
you,
you focus on?
well, yeah, or would you focus on one? Would you, like when you're writing ping pong back between the two, or when you're saying writing an article, have one article that's totally focused on that one ideal client, or would you mix it with having both of them in one article? How
Yeah.
would you do that?
That's a really great question because I'm struggling with that myself on my own topic. I just wrote a book that I'm planning to sell. Um, where if people is and it's got two use cases. Number one, if people maybe just want to dip their toe into proofreading and editing and aren't ready to hire me yet, this gives them a process they can implement and they can still get better quality written content without necessarily having to pay for me. So that's one use case. The second use case is if you want to jump into the proofreading or editing game and do that yourself, like as a freelancer, you can use the same process to do that because it's all the same. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that myself. And I think for most of my advertising, I'm going to choose the first option because I think there's probably a bigger market for it. Um, And then I think with my newsletter, I might I might blend the two because there's probably a lot more editors and proofreaders on my newsletter. Uh, so yeah, that's I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's just kind of depends on what's the medium, who's my audience. Does it make sense to mention both or just stick with one? I don't know. That's probably a case by case basis thing. That's a good question.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so do I get the prize, David, of stumping the expert?
You
No,
always
no,
get
no.
the prize for
Oh,
stumping the
yeah.
expert, Dave. Like that,
No.
that's why we have you in these things.
Yeah, I think, but this is a good discussion. I think probably the way I would go about it is really have whichever one you're targeting, make sure you're addressing that. And you can sprinkle in some other stuff as well. And why not write two different books?
Oh yeah, that's true. I could do that.
Because you could do that, but like with a company, if they really have two main types of clients, it's kind of hard to do two different websites. I suppose you could, but maybe it's two sections. I don't know. That's seems harder to me.
Yeah.
Well, I think the way you thought about it, John, is really helpful. Where's the bigger opportunity, right?
Yeah,
Where's the bigger profit? You
yeah.
know, let the less profitable part have to translate for themselves, but focus on the one that's more profitable or more likely to buy, right? Because it
Yeah.
could be that they're maybe they're more profitable, but they're not as likely to purchase this. And so those kinds of questions can be like, okay, we know this is a market, but this is a little less of a market. And so we're going to make them do the hard work to translate, but we're going to really speak more clearly and focus on the one. It sounds like it's way you have instinctually kind of done this with your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Because
kind of,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
Oh,
would
good.
say it really does depend upon your goal. And really, like if we're gonna author, we got to get really clear cut. Like it might be that your goal of these blogs is to generate interest for them to call the client, right? Versus buy something on the site. Like for you, John, it might be what's your goal? Is it for them to hire you? Well, maybe that's the best goal and establish yourself as even more of an expert. From that point, then you can target people who want to do what you do.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I'm approaching it because you're absolutely right. That book is geared towards kind of like that's the first little fish hook in the mouth. And then
Yeah.
when they kind of get used to that and I was like, oh, maybe I should just farm this out to John. Right. So yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like it makes a lot of sense to really think about what the goal is of your end client. You know, if it's obviously making money, then okay, who can make the most money for you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Shelley has another one, which yeah, I empathize with your question, Sally. You're saying that your client grows and sells three trees. So you've been writing blogs for the fast past few years. I wish I could speak. Past few years for them, once a month, but now you're struggling to get new topics or keywords for them, and you're concerned about cannibalizing them. Yeah. How would you approach that problem, John?
Hmm. Yeah, I would actually, I'll be honest, in this particular case, I would reach out to someone like David and ask for his help. I wish I was an SEO expert and a keyword expert. I'm not. So I mean, I'm sure I could come up with more topics and keywords. Like you can do that kind of keyword research, but yeah, the cannibalizing them thing, that's a little beyond my pay grade. I mean, I'd have to defer to you on that one.
Yeah, yeah. So the one of the reasons I love this conversation about content in the context of SEO, this is good content for SEO and modern SEO is not necessarily keyword focused. We do the keyword research, and the Curious Ants background will show you how to do curious or keyword research. And out of that, you should develop a ton of potential blog posts, some of which you've never thought of before. So look at the Curious Ants keyword research process and see if that helps. And I even recommend like going back and doing that every 6 months because you'll have learned about the client better. Data changes, Google changes. So go do the keyword research process as a brainstorming process, but don't be so consumed on keywords in the blog. right? The blog is what we call a long-tailed strategy. So we know where the money keywords are. These are the things people are searching for that they're going to buy. Buy an apple tree, ship an apple tree to me, you know, uh, how do I purchase a pear tree? Whatever the money keywords are, those are dedicated landing pages about apple trees, pear trees, and orange trees, right? That's where the sales happen. The blog is about talking about the industry at an expert level that is picking up the keywords that we can't predict people are searching for. You'll notice when John started, he's talking about a medicine practice and is an article about breathing, right? He didn't necessarily have to do the keyword research to discover, oh, as he's talking about this type of medicine, how you are intentionally breathing is important. So he's not saying, oh, I'm trying to rank for how to breathe. He's really trying to talk from a search perspective, talk about this form of medicine in the context of breath. And what's going to happen as he writes the article, he's going to accidentally rank for stuff he never could have predicted. And that's the power of the blog, picking up all those keywords we can't predict so that we then get a ton of traffic. So what you find after years of blogging is the blog gets a ton of traffic. And if you look in Search Console, which will tell you the keywords you got the traffic for, you'll be like, what? Someone searched for that? Who knew? Right? And that's the purpose of the blog. So it's picking up the crumbs that we can't predict, not necessarily saying, oh, here's a keyword I want to quote unquote rank for. So thinking broadly about the topic, kind of like John started by describing, is a really good SEO strategy that doesn't have to rely on, okay, I rank for this keyword and this keyword's better than that. That's not to say that the keyword research parts can't help you brainstorm. That's a really valuable part of this. But I have a client that I've written for I have not written my client, my writers have written for like 10 years. And we've well exhausted every potential keyword for that. But their blog is still the number one driver because we just basically got to the point where we're like, okay, we're talking about the industry in general and it's helpful.
So I
So
think I want to
yeah, please do.
piggyback on that. Yeah, because that reminded me, I think, of a previous conversation we had. When you approach SEO that way, now you're writing for human beings, and is probably which is what Google is trying to
Right.
give you anyway. And so
Yeah.
I guess I'm more of an SEO expert than I thought because I forgot what we had talked about before. Like, yeah, if you just write for humans, like that's the best approach.
Yeah. So yeah, I think your example here, Shelley, is really good. You said you wrote one this December on evergreens in Mercia mushrooms, relationship and how it ties into Christmas. So things like this. Yeah, but I would you this is where we get into stuff like intent. So we still would remember that we're selling trees. So in this article about mushrooms and Christmas trees, the blog doesn't have to be a sales pitch. In fact, you'll lose credibility in the blog if it's a sales pitch. But at the end of the day, it still has to relate to the topic of what we're selling in some capacity, right? So that's what keeps it relevant and helps the blog help the bottom line for the clients, which in this case is just selling trees, right? So that's not to say this blog post couldn't do that, right? Sometimes it's as simple as, and if your tree has been destroyed by mushrooms, maybe you need to get a new one. And here's how you get it linked to the page where you can buy the evergreen trees, right? We've now related it to what we're selling. By the way, Google really likes those internal links to your sales page where you do the hard sell, We have the best Christmas trees. These Christmas trees are not just any old trees. They bring Christmas spirit and joy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For privacy. Yeah. Yeah, good, good. So we're running out of time, and I really appreciate y'all coming today. John, clearly we all need your help. How do we reach you to get your help?
Yeah, I put a couple of links at the top of the chat. You can always you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, John Clements, or Cedar Press Proofreading, and I'll come up either way. Or you can go to cedarpressproofreading.com. There's actually a button on the website that says book a call, and we can just sit down and talk just like we're talking right now. And we'll just see what can help you need and how we can help you. And that and we'll leave friends. Okay, that's my guarantee. No matter what happens, we'll leave friends. So again, thanks so much for the chance to come and talk to you guys. Enjoy meeting all of you. And yeah, even the guy who stumped me, thank you very much for doing that, because that gives me something to work on.
His mom's a shocker, so we'll allow it.
We'll allow it.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank
Yeah,
you,
so
John.
I will close by saying, hey, thank you all for coming. Like, this is what we do. This is every time there's a fifth Wednesday of the month, where we talk about the ideas of that are adjacent to SEO. Because one of the things we do, we actually do gather once a week to talk about specific SEO topics. That's in a program called Curious Ants, where not only do you get all the processes of how to do SEO, but when you're stumped and you're like, what do I write about Christmas trees this week? Or how do I get my clients to approve content? Or how do I do keyword research for my client? We bring these questions together once a week, and we come together and brainstorm them all in one place. And you can all get access to that at curiousants.com. So check that out. If you haven't already, we'd love for you to join us. I think everybody here knows that that's like the highlight of my week. So thank you all for coming. Stay warm, and we'll hope to talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.